and we're going to play Rising Up with Sonali. You can hear it on our HD3 channel, The Source. It's a 24-hour-a-day news channel. You can listen at WMNF.org or on the WMNF app. It happens Saturday evenings at 11. Here's Rising Up with Sonali. Let me know what you think. DJ at WMNF.org.
Welcome to Yes Presents Rising Up with Sonali, your weekly antidote to the doom and gloom of mainstream news, lifting up solutions that bring us closer to economic, racial, gender, and environmental justice. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, Senior Editor at Yes Media. As we wrap up 2024, and what a year it's been, we'll bring you some of our favorite interviews. And we'll kick things off with a lengthy and deep conversation with best-selling author, activist, and social justice facilitator Adrienne Maree Brown about her brand new book, Loving Corrections. She'll read from the book, reflect on patriarchy and racism, explore responses to the Palestine genocide in Gaza, how to think about cancel culture, and so much more. Then Julia Holtz joins me to examine a new trend in healthcare called social prescribing, which she explains complements traditional Western medicine to address human health holistically. That's coming up in just a moment. This is Yes Presents Rising Up with Sonali, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, Senior Editor at Yes Media. You can find this program at yesmagazine.org, watch it on Free Speech TV, and listen to it on community and independent radio stations nationwide. Organizing for progress is always challenging, and more so in the face of surging fascism, authoritarianism, and white supremacy. What if there was a guidebook for how we sustain social movements and ourselves at the same time? Best-selling author, activist, social justice facilitator, and coach Adrienne Maree Brown has written such a book, one that they describe as, quote, a roadmap toward collective power, righting wrongs, and true belonging. Adrienne Maree Brown is the author of several books, including Emergent Strategy and Pleasure Activism, as well as We Will Not Cancel Us and the speculative fiction trilogy Grievers. She's the editor of the Emergent Strategy series, and I spoke with her recently about her new book, Loving Corrections, just out on August 20th.
Hi.
So let me first start by asking you, when you talk about Loving Corrections, which is the title of your book, it, as I was opening it and reading the first few pages, it certainly struck a chord in me, and I think a lot of us who have grown up in activist spaces found many times when we've had kind of a sense of self-righteousness and felt that the people around us weren't seeing things that the way that we were, only to find maybe years later that it was us, that we ourselves might have really needed a little nudging. So tell me where your book came from, because it feels like it's a common feeling that many of us who've spent years or decades in organizing spaces have.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love and I'm so grateful for in my life is that I got politicized young in college. And I think one of the beauties of that is that from the moment people started pulling me together and helping me figure out what my values were in an intentional way, because like I'd grown up inside of a military household, inside of patriotism, inside of patriarchy, inside of ableism, inside of heteronormativity. I just had grown up in a world that was like, this is the way. And when people started to tap at that, I'm grateful that it was people who were peers and it was people who were older than me, teachers. And so I had a sense of like, oh, there's something I thought that is not actually in alignment with humanity on Earth in the long run. And the person who's telling me cares about me. I can feel that they care about me. They're taking the time to really tune in and to really notice me as I am and to say, can I talk to you about what you just said? Can I talk to you about how you're looking at this? Can I talk to you and offer maybe a different way? Have you read this book? Have you ever heard of this person? Have you ever heard of Audre Lorde? Have you ever heard of Bell Hooks? Have you ever heard of Octavia Butler? Have you ever heard of Grace Lee Boggs? You know, have you heard of Alice Walker? Have you heard of Harriet Tubman? You know, just sort of going through and not only have you heard, but do you know what they came to teach us and what they came to correct inside of the system, right? And to me, a loving correction is about being in right relationship. It's saying that all of us together are trying to find our way into this right relationship with our home planet, with each other as a species, with everything else that's alive on Earth, and with ourselves, you know? So that to me is it came out of that early politicization. And then I think something has happened in the past, I feel like 10 years it's been growing. Like I think since social media and internet became so predominantly ways that people communicate, there's this way that correction has become like just so reductive and so combative and so aggressive. And that's become a norm for how we talk to each other when we're like, oh, whoa, what you just said was racist. And there's a way that we come at someone like, and now I will crush you. Now I will destroy you. And I'm like, that's not what I've ever seen work as a learning tool. There's a way that you tune into someone's humanity to be able to be in the conversation. So this book is me tuning into humanity on a variety of topics and being like, here's the crux of what I think we need to understand about this. And my hope is that people take the book and hand it to people that they love, that they read it and they're like, I know someone who I love and care about, and they need to read this essay, or they need to read this section. And I don't expect that every single piece is going to be needed for everybody. So there's like a word for white people, there's relinquishing the patriarchy, there's stuff on Zionism, there's stuff on being high at meetings, there's this whole conversation I have with my sisters. Like there's all these different pieces that are quite divergent in their nature, but I think that they all are examples and practices of this act of loving correction.
Let's talk about patriarchy. Men, cis men, straight white men, have often been the focus of our ire, our collective ire. They can be allies, they can be enemies, they can be they are fellow human beings. And I love that you talk about interactions with men who need loving corrections on the very most personal level, which is in intimate partnerships, and the ways in which we've seen dynamics play out in our own lives that are so deeply problematic, and sometimes we ourselves who are, who know better, don't call them out in the right way, and who end up enduring far too much. So how does one, you can't take on the whole patriarchy, but maybe one person at a time, how does one offer loving corrections to, say, that partner or that person in one's life who embodies patriarchy?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the first things for any of these meta systems, right, that we're living inside of, I think one of the first things for people is to normalize that there is a system at play and that we were all trained to participate in it. Because I think there's a way, one of the things that we do in movement is we learn something and then we try to act like we always knew that and that we were never a part of the system in the first place and that like we're totally not now, right? And there's this righteousness that comes into our system. And for me, it's remembering like there was a time that I also was actively in the system, believing in it, actively like it's dinner time. Like every woman in this household has to come together to make sure that my dad has his plate and that he has enough rolls and like we all have to clean it afterwards, right? I was raised in that, right? And I was raised as we changed it because my dad was blessed to fall in love with my mom and then together they made 3 feminist daughters. So, but we were in that process and it's intimate. It's intimate to be like, wait, first of all, do you even know you're in this system? Do you understand that you're in it and it is in you? And it's not because you're a bad person and you went to the store and you were like, patriarchy, taking that home. It's like, this is the air that you breathe, the water you've been swimming in, the family that you've been structured in, every school space, every doctor's office you've gone to, every space you've been in, every gym, every single place you've gone has been reinforcing this particular binary narrative of gender and where men are and where women are, and that's how it is. And so if that's the whole system that everybody has been ingrained in, and that organized religion has doubled down on and government has doubled down on, for me, that gives me some compassion for myself and compassion for the person I'm talking to. That I'm like, okay, have you even ever had a choice point offered to you, right? And a choice point is not offered to someone when you're just screaming in their face. It might cause a choice to happen, but a lot of times I wonder, I'm like, did you stop and did you actually sit down and talk to this person? And what was the nature of the conversation? And were you honest? And did you stay in, right? The tolerance of being able to stay in the face of these systems, that's something we have to actually build up like a muscle, right? That I'm like, I'm going to make things a little uncomfortable for us right now, because we're not supposed to name that we're inside this matrix. We're supposed to just be in it and be docile and participate and play our role. And so when you start to call attention, like, do you see that we're kind of in this like cloaking heavy system that's like in, and it's going in our pores, and like, can we just notice first of all that we're in it? Okay, who are you in it? Who am I in it? What does that do to our sense of being peers, of being equals, of being able to have a conversation? Can we slow down and normalize and just notice that we're in it? As soon as we begin to notice that we're in something, we start to have agency. This is actually, the gift of meditation also. Like, meditation allows you to be like, oh, I am not my thoughts. My thoughts are, but I have agency. I get to make a choice inside of all of that, of what I'm actually going to do with these thoughts and which thoughts I'm going to focus in on and focus away from, right? The same thing is happening at all times with these systems. So when I talk to men that I love, first I'm like, you are a human like I am. And both of us are inside a system that tries to make us think there's something radically different about us. And I'm going to try to bring us back to being humans. And let's see what happens from there.
Right. And there has been a lot of work done in recent years about the invisible labor of women, mental loads that women carry that have given us the language to be able to speak to our partners. I love that
and I have to say, I have to shout out for this, the piece that I have in here, Relinquishing the Patriarchy. I would not have been able to write without, I have this crew of women that I went to college with. That are still in a group chat, and we do like vacations together when there's not extraordinary conditions that keep us from each other. And most of them are mothers, and many of them are wives to cis men or in serious partnerships with cis men. And I really went to that source because I was like, here's what I've got. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm noticing. But I'm not really in that direct relational contact. At least I wasn't at the time that I was writing the book. I was like, I can't even imagine what y'all are doing. Y'all are in the front line trenches. You're married to these people. Right? You're married to the enemy. Like, what's going on? And I asked them, I was like, you love men enough to have committed your whole life to being around one. What do you need them to hear? What do you see as the patterns? And they really were like, the invisible labor is the thing.
Right. Well, I love that you delve into science fiction in your book as this way in which we can imagine new worlds. I mean, we think of science fiction as, just a sort of genre of pop culture and content, a genre of television or movies or books. But of course, they are and always have been, especially when written by marginalized people or people from marginalized communities. They've been a way to imagine a completely different future, either dystopias that can be turned into utopias or the fight for utopias. And Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler were, you point out in your book, your biggest influences. Why were these two women's work so critical to you, and how can they help us rethink the limits of our own imagination?
Well, Octavia Butler has shaped so much of my work. You know, she's always, I don't know if you can see, but this whole area is all like Octavia books and Octavia things. But I think she, for me, was a massive influence because she was a nerdy Black girl. And she was a nerdy Black girl who saw herself not just in the future, but shaping it, leading it, that her ideas really mattered. Coming across her work at a formative age, you know, there was also part of this moment of awakening, landing in college, being away from my parents for the first time, and Octavia Butler is in my hands. And I was like, I too am a nerdy Black girl who has a lot to say and think about the world. And I believe that there are parts of the future that are living in me. And so she was a massive influence. And then Ursula K. Le Guin was kind of a surprise for me. I read her Wizard of Earthsea, and I started going down the path into her like fantastical worlds, and I thought that was amazing. But she really shook me when I read The Dispossessed. So The Dispossessed is this novel that is set basically on this anarchist moon that is in orbit around a fundamentally capitalist planet, and it's really trying to understand how this society functions and what it did to free itself from the binding of capitalism. And then new problems emerge, which is one of Octavia and Ursula's favorite things. It's like, well, okay, what if we go and, you know, we do make this kind of change from how things are on Earth? What are the new problems that emerge? And in The Dispossessed, it's like, well, what do you do if you are a bright, shiny star mind, someone who's really thinking outside the box and who comes up with something that all the species needs to have access to, but you live in an anarchist society where no one is supposed to be special, no one's supposed to stand out, everyone's switching roles to make sure that we all share in the menial task and the you know, high-minded task, whatever you might call that. What do you do? And that book really changed me. It made me really consider what kind of society I wanted to be a part of and what freedom actually means. And I think up until that point, there'd been this like breaking chains concept of freedom. Ursula Le Guin, part of what she offered to me was the idea that being in community, being able to truly belong, that was actually a way of freedom. And being in a community where no one owned anything, and the freedom came from not being bound to belongings, but being able to be a free being in a community that shares what it has. I got really excited about that. And then I read The Left-Handed Darkness, and she flipped my mind on gender. And, you know, I just love people who are like, but what if it was totally different from this? Both of them have done that for me so many times. And I think the fact that they're writing as women of a certain era and a certain time period, and their imaginations are like, I can see not only just beyond this for myself, not only just like women having some equality, but I can see beyond this whole thing. It could be totally different. It's all experimental. We have made it up thus far, and we can make it up differently. And I just love that. It always nourishes me to know that.
We talked about patriarchy. Let's talk about race, racism, white supremacy. And these days, of course, white supremacy going hand in hand with Zionism and anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. This genocide that's playing out in Gaza since last October, but of course in slow motion for a lot longer than that. You write about that. You were very active on social media about that. It's been really difficult to speak up about Palestine on social media because, of course, we're throttled by the anti-Palestinian algorithms. So it's really hard to have those kinds of deep, important, powerful and painful conversations around Israel and Palestine that need to happen. So let's talk a little bit about that and why you have been so outspoken on this issue. And those parallels that you see very clearly between Zionism and white supremacy here in the U.S.
Thank you for asking those questions. I grew up, I don't know that people always know this, we don't know so much about each other, but I grew up, most of my childhood was spent in Germany. My dad was in the military. We were stationed in Germany 3 times. And so I grew up in this world in which the worst thing had happened, and it had happened to Jewish people. And I went to museums there, Holocaust museums. I went to the concentration camps, which have been turned into these museum spaces, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz. And I just remember it being incredibly important to me to understand that humans could do that to each other, and that this tendency, this idea of white supremacy, or my friend Makani has been really talking about like not reinforcing the concept of supremacy through the words and just saying white sociopathy or other things. And I'm really in that dance of trying to figure out the language for it. But this white dominance, this way that people think whiteness is something that makes you other and different and better than and needs to be purely protected, and that there's any bloodline, any lineage, any way of being that's like the purity is the thing. And if we mix with some other people, if we let these people be a part of our society, then it dilutes something about us. This idea of being chosen in that way, all these ideas are tied in at the root system as violent and antithetical to humanity. But they can take on power, political power, and they work by silencing. So they work by making people scared to speak up, scared to say what is, scared to challenge that status quo, and then getting in cahoots with other people who are like, yeah, like I benefit also from this worldview, and so I'm going to stand with you and I'll stay quiet. So I think having grown up in that, when I first learned about what was happening in Palestine, it was really confusing for me. Like I was just, I was like, I can't wrap my mind around it. And I hadn't done a lot of the trauma healing work that I have since done, which is like, oh, trauma really distorts your sense of safety, your sense of self, and really understanding that for Jewish people, there was never that reckoning. Just like in the US, for Black people, for Indigenous people, there's never actually been any reckoning. There's never been a moment of being like, we were really wrong, and here's the repair, here's the reparation, here's the conversation about that. That never happened for Jewish people in Germany, in Poland, in Europe, like not in a meaningful way and not when it needed to happen. And so that trauma has just lived on and become one in some ways with the identity of Jewish people. And so when this issue came up this time, I felt grateful that I had already spent a lot of time thinking about this and learning about this from Jewish people who had already opted out of Zionism. And I think that really matters for me. But I'm like, I didn't learn about this from Palestinian people, actually. I learned about it from anti-Zionist Jewish people. And that was just I was in a 5-year relationship with someone who was an anti-Zionist Jewish person, and watching them organize within their own family, within their own community, and also organize me and help me understand, there's a real distinction between loving Jewish people and being anti-Zionist, and wanting Jewish safety and being anti-Zionist. And really trying to unbraid those things has really been important in my adult life. I also think solidarity is incredibly important. I think that I see myself in Palestinian struggle, and I also see myself as responsible for Palestinian suffering, because I live in the US and I have to pay taxes here to stay out of jail, even though I don't agree with so many of the choices that are being made with our taxes. I love taxes as a concept, and I love when they're being well used. I want to make sure that that's noted. But because we have a military industrial complex of a nation, it's really daunting and depressing to be forced to contribute to things that you are antithetical to. So for me, writing and taking up that space on social media and in my interviews and in my life has been a way of trying to combat what the U.S. is responsible for. And yeah, it feels very personal to me. It feels like I was put on earth specifically to like have the experiences I had in Germany, build the Jewish community that I have built, and then be in these positions where there's some light shining my way and I can do something about it. During the U.S. Social Forum in 2010, that was in Detroit, that was the first time that it was really, the question was called, Adrienne, you actually have to make a stand here because there's a pink washing effort that's playing out and someone was trying to put workshops that were like, Israel is the only place for queer people to be safe in the entire Middle East. And I was like, oh, we always want queer people to be safe. And I had folks help me understand like the divisive nature of that. And that it was like, yeah, it was so, there were so many people sitting in that room who needed the education all at the same time. And we made a strong decision to say, we're actually not going to allow that kind of pink washing strategy to happen here and like allow us to divide our Arab and Muslim brothers and sisters from safety in this space or from being queer people, from being trans people for the sake of this workshop. So yeah, it's been something that's been really important for me to understand and to stand up for. And I think we're in a really particular moment where what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Palestine, if you really turn and face it, it'll help you understand everything else you need to understand about how race works, about how class works, about how military spending works, about how alliances work, about how power works. And all of us, anyone who has a history of being on the other side, the losing side of apartheid, the losing side of Jim Crow, the losing side of these systems of segregation and separation, and anyone who's been on the losing side of erasure, genocide, of ethnic cleansing, like that's why the whole globe, that's why everyone except for the US and Israel that is a nation that can say something about this is all standing together by this point, because everyone has that history of being like, oh, you colonized us. You brought apartheid to our shores. You tried to ethnic cleanse us. You erased these people. Like, we see what it is, and we're no longer going to stand for it.
I mean, it's remarkable, the solidarity that you see, that people of color feel. It's just, towards Palestinians, we can, even if we don't know too many details about the issue, it seems very obvious to us, any of us who've come from lands that have once been colonized or felt, or as you said, been part of communities that have faced erasure. So on that note, I'm wondering if you might read.
Just one thing I want to say there really, really briefly is like, colonial thinking is cultish thinking, it's delusional thinking, right? The idea that like, I need to go from where I am, and I need to go to another place where people are, and I need to take over that place. And then that's going to be how I have my safety and my abundance. Like, it's such a delusional thought, but our whole earth has been organized and colonized, right? By this way of thinking. So even the thing that, what you just said, like, it's clear to us. Yeah. I'm like, that's because we're awakening from mass colonization, right? And I see a ton of people in this awakening, which is the only thing that makes this period in any way redeemable for me, is that more people are paying attention and more people are connecting the dots than I've ever seen in my lifetime. Right. And so that makes me, okay, get a little louder, stay steady, keep bringing that attention, and keep tying it to the Congo, to the Sudan, to what happened to Armenian people, to what's happening in the Tigray. Like, keep tying it in, that none of these people are disposable. Why are they being treated that way? Why do we let that happen?
I'm wondering if you can read your poem on Palestine. You have several poems in your new book, Loving Corrections, that we're discussing, and I'm wondering if you can read one of those for our audiences.
Sure. I'll read this poem that's called Free Palestine, which I posted on my page, I think on October 8th. And as soon as October 7th happened, it felt really important for me to make the case, to connect it. I'm like, this is not happening in a vacuum, whatever has happened, because I immediately was like, Israel is the king of misinformation and the king of nothing is as it seems. So, it was like, the thing, no matter what else is happening here, I know that if Palestine was free, this situation would be different. So the poem is called Free Palestine, and it goes like this. The grief builds up. When it spills over, it touches everyone. Can you imagine, upon hearing this news, that it is not one pain or the other, one grief or the other, one safety or the other? One wound winds through us all, gaping wide, festering, blooming. Can you imagine? Can you not imagine hearing this news with a wide enough heart for the grief of each parent, for the grief of each child? The land grieves too. The whole earth breaks on the shores of Rasa. We must imagine, before the fissure scars, we must all imagine freedom if we want that future beyond war.
Adrienne Maree Brown is my guest. We're talking about their new book, Loving Corrections. Let's there's so much to talk about. I mean, I would love to keep you for the whole hour. I know that your time is limited. A couple more things that I do want to talk about. And so finally, Adrienne Maree Brown, you had a column at Yes Magazine titled Murmurations that you started that is still continuing with writers that you've brought to us. I'm an editor at Yes Magazine, and we are just so happy to have had these beautiful columns called Murmurations, that some of which you've included in your new book, Loving Corrections. And I'm wondering if we can end our conversation with a little bit about what these columns were. Murmurations, they like you, don't fit the mold of what's considered like standard formats of writing, which is very much central to the joy of reading such a column. What are Murmurations? Which ones did you choose in your book and why?
Yeah, so it was really beautiful that I got to do this column, start this column with Yes Magazine. And the first year of it, I was really focused on accountability. So when I was thinking about Loving Corrections, I was like, really, so much of it is just like being accountable to the truth, being accountable to what actually is happening. So the columns that I picked were the ones that kind of take us on this journey from getting in right relationship to ourselves, really figuring out like, what is my own sense of accountability and how do I be accountable to myself, and moving into right relationship with others. How to be accountable in relationship to people I love, how to be accountable inside of a shared economy, how do I be accountable when I've been hurt, and how do I be accountable in terms of how I speak in the world and what I'm offering into the world. So we wanted to gather some of these. All of the columns are still available, obviously, on Yes's website. And the rest of the columns that are coming in from other writers are incredible. Each one, I get to be then on the receiving side of the experience of all these different voices now. But yeah, in the book, I wanted to just be like, let's murmurate. Let's murmurate accountability, right? And I think for readers or listeners or folks who might not know, murmuration is this process by which a lot of creatures are able to move together as one, right? There's like, oh my gosh, that seems seamless. There's some huge beauty. How are they doing that? The rules are everyone's just paying attention to the creatures right around them, whether it's the birds right around them, the fish right around them. Everyone's paying attention. They're at right distance, right relationship, so that they're not crashing into each other, and that they're really following and leading, and whoever's on the outside is really setting direction. I was like, okay, how do we apply that as humans to accountability?
Adrienne Maree Brown, thank you so much for spending this time with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for paying attention to this book. I wrote it from so much love, and I really hope it lands that way with people. So Thank you.
My guest has been Adrienne Maree Brown, best-selling author, writer, activist, social justice facilitator, and coach. Her earlier books include Emergent Strategy, Pleasure Activism, We Will Not Cancel Us, and the speculative fiction trilogy Grievers. She's also the editor of the Emergent Strategy series, and we've been discussing her new book, Loving Corrections, just out August 20th. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, senior editor at Yes Media and host of Yes Presents Rising Up with Sonali. You can find this program at yesmagazine.org, watch it on Free Speech TV, and listen to it on community and independent radio stations nationwide. Our audio podcast is on iTunes and Spotify.
This is Rising Up with Sonali on WMNF Tampa.
This is Yes Presents Rising Up with Sonali, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, senior editor at Yes Media. The healthcare system in the United States is generally an individualist one. We have to acquire health insurance and find a personal physician who will prescribe medication as needed for our physical ailments. If we're mentally stressed, we might see a therapist to learn coping skills or a psychiatrist who may prescribe an antidepressant. Our overall health is seen as disconnected from our environments and from one another. And addressing those external issues falls on us as individuals again to tackle, such as figuring out how to stretch our paychecks to cover necessities, as well as extras like fitness plans or vacations, and finding time for social activities, childcare, and so on. Well, a new movement based on an old idea is taking hold. What if, in addition to prescribing medication, doctors and others were able to prescribe activities that addressed our lack of connection? Writing about that is Julie Hotz, journalist and author of The Connection Cure, considered to be the US's first book exploring the science, the stories, and the spread of what's called social prescribing. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Wired, Scientific American, Boston Globe, Time, and more. And she helps other journalists report on the big news ideas changing the world at the Solutions Journalism Network. Welcome to the program, Julie.
Thank you so much, Sonali. So great to be here.
So let's first talk about the science behind the connections and a little bit, in a way, sort of the human history, which you go into in your book. I want to make clear to our audiences that you're not suggesting that we don't need pharmaceuticals or medication. You know, if you have cancer or diabetes, social prescribing isn't going to help you survive. So what is the science of prescribing connection in terms of the historical framework of some of the historical figures that have done so, and then the science that has affirmed that indeed some of these historical figures who started this trend were on the right track?
That's a great point. Let's start off by saying absolutely, social prescribing is not about replacing pill prescribing, therapy, or anything else. We want this to be another option on the healthcare menu for treating some of the symptoms of illnesses that can be healed in our environments. So what I mean by that is, if you think about it, we as humans didn't evolve to live quite like we do now. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go back. But we evolved in communities. We evolved to move our bodies and spend time in nature and tell stories and make meaning with our neighbors. And there's some science suggesting that returning to doing those things, integrating those activities in our daily lives, can have tremendous mental and physical health benefits. So the book goes into details of each of these kind of 5 core ingredients: movement, nature, art, service, belonging. But in general, we've found that, for example, moving your body, is associated with increased serotonin, a hormone and neurotransmitter associated with energy, mood, sleep. We've found that spending time in nature is associated with increased attention and reductions in the stress hormone cortisol. We found that creating art is a powerful coping mechanism for anxiety. We found that feeling a sense of belonging with other people is incredibly effective for our health and longevity. In fact, a great book by Dr. Robert Waldinger says that human relationships, social relationships, is the #1 predictor of a long, healthy, happy life. So social prescribing is about reconnecting us to those life-giving virtues, whether it's through an art class or swimming lessons or a cycling group or even a simple community potluck. And the stories in this book talk about how patients can really be healed through them.
So this doesn't necessarily sound groundbreaking or new, right? In our social media, for example, there's all sorts of prescriptions, sort of ironic given that most of us get disconnected because we're paying too much attention to social media. But you've got your TikTok therapists and others who keep reminding us, our sort of wellness coaches, life coaches, often in the US especially, is a very American phenomenon, know that this is true, have helped people navigate individually. So why, how do you take the science that's already known, that's accepted, that's widely, seen as not controversial and intersect that with our healthcare system? And why is it the job of the healthcare system to address that?
That's right. We hear that a lot. It's some people say, why does this book need to be written? Of course, we know that movement, art, and nature are good for us. I think there are a couple of reasons. Number one, social prescribing is about having healthcare actually be the sort of facilitator of this prescription, and then using the resources of healthcare to actually put the patient who's receiving this social prescription in a group that meets once a week to ride their bikes together, or is part of this nature course, or is part of this art class. In other words, whereas sometimes the solutions we read about on Instagram or otherwise have marketed to us are very much, you go and spend time in nature, you go and create some art. It kicks the burden back to the individual. But having a health worker actually prescribe us these things, number one, means probably the patient's more likely to take it seriously because they know that health worker is going to check in on it. And number two, prescribing them to an actual group that does this is a form of accountability. In other words, a social prescription I love for myself is my running group here in Brooklyn. And I am following it because I know that they meet every Wednesday at this certain time. They'll be expecting me if I don't show up. So social prescribing is a way to help us actually practice the things that we know to be true and good for our health. And your other question is a great one too. Why should healthcare be doing this, right? In an ideal world, it would be easy for us to know about what kind of activities and resources exist in our community and prescribe ourselves. I think social prescribing helps us get there in the meantime. It's a way to funnel the existing resources and mechanisms of how we do healthcare, right? When we don't feel well, we go to the doctor, to actually have that healthcare institution prescribe us something that goes beyond just individual solutions and actually reconnects us to our communities.
So where is this trend taking hold? We have a hard enough time here in the United States to get our health insurance companies to cover needed surgeries, say, or other procedures. And so that's a whole nother maybe aspect to our conversation that I hope we'll get to, which is that the U.S. healthcare system is, of course, just not set up for a holistic approach. Where else in the world is social prescribing actually being taken seriously by a mainstream healthcare system?
Definitely. And that's a great point. We'll come back to that because I have good news. I thought the same thing, but social prescribing actually has had some uptake in the United States. But you're right to point out that at first it began in the United Kingdom, which some folks know has a very different healthcare system than ours. Their healthcare system is national, which means taxpayers pay in, they all get the even care out. And it also means that they have a big national incentive, right, to make their healthcare work for everybody. And for folks who have friends in the UK or live there themselves, you might know that there have been serious issues with the UK's healthcare system, the NHS, recently. Issues of pressure, wait lists, not enough hospital beds, overcrowding at the emergency room. And what's happening actually is that patients who need clinical care, right, patients who might have cancer and need chemotherapy, are having a harder time getting a spot in healthcare because it's being taken by someone who might be struggling with a more non-medical issue. Actually, the data says that in the UK, 1 in 5 patients come to the doctor for social, non-medical reasons. My favorite story is about a man who would come to the emergency room every Friday night because he says, if I'm alone on Friday night, I don't know what I would do with myself. Right, which is heartbreaking. And of course, we want that man to get care, but we also don't want that man to take the spot of somebody who's really needs the clinical care of a doctor. So the UK invested in social prescribing at first as a way to tackle these non-medical issues because it was an incentive for them to be able to reduce the number of people going to healthcare for non-medical reasons. They even invested in a position called the link worker, which is a healthcare professional, sort of like an intermediary between the doctor and community, who really has time to get to know what the patient's interested in and what is available in the community for them. And sure enough, the UK has found that investing in this has been tremendously successful. It has lowered the number of hospitalizations. It has lowered the number of ER visits. It has reduced the number of people going to the GP for non-medical reasons. Some projections suggest it could save up to £8 for every £1 invested into this system. So that's a little bit about the UK, and other national healthcare system, other countries with national healthcare systems like Portugal, Canada to an extent, have adopted similar social prescribing frameworks for similar reasons. But the US, as we know, is different. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about what social prescribing looks like here.
Well, let's get to that in just a moment, but give us some of the stories, because, it's one thing to sort of hear about the science and about the fact that it is being adopted, at least in the UK, but give us a sense of like a story like the one you just mentioned of the person who comes in to see the doctor because they're actually just really lonely. How has social prescribing worked on an individual level? Because I think that can make it real for audiences.
Absolutely. So one of the first stories that the book tells is about a man named Frank. And Frank, when I meet him, is this jovial guy, loves his grandchildren, was a truck driver, passionate about that, but had developed basically from being a truck driver, type 2 diabetes. And, this was really hard for him and expensive. His doctors prescribed him insulin to help with that and told him he'd be on insulin for the rest of his life. Other doctors would sort of shame him for not eating better, for not being more active. Until finally Frank goes to another doctor named Ollie Hart, who tries to get more of Frank's whole story and sees him not as, somebody who was lazy or couldn't heal, but actually somebody who maybe had the power to find solutions themselves. So what does Ollie do? Ollie asks Frank, instead of what's the matter with you, he asks Frank a version of what matters to you, which is the tagline of social prescribing. And it comes out that Frank, as a child, used to love riding his bike. So what does Ollie do with the same resources and mechanisms he might prescribe insulin or something like Ozempic? Ollie prescribes Frank a spot in a local course for a cycling group targeted at people over 50, like Frank, who haven't been on the bike in a while, and actually meets once a week to relearn the basics of riding a bike. And Frank's story is amazing. He says he finally felt like every time he walked into the doctor's office, he didn't have to slink his head and feel ashamed. He felt like he was with someone who was actually interested in his recovery.
Now, someone like Frank might have been helped by this prescription simply because maybe he wasn't aware that there was this cycling group that he could have joined. So certainly a social prescribing, I can see a huge advantage being helping people become aware of the resources that are accessible to them. But what about being able to afford them? And also, especially here in the United States, many of us don't do the things that we already know we would like to do and are good for us because we don't have the time, because we are overloaded with work and childcare responsibilities. Our entire system is set up to treat people as cogs in a big wheel, churning out profits for our corporate overlords, to put it a little simplistically. And so let's get into talking about the United States healthcare system and what the challenges are that a social prescribing method might face here in the US.
Absolutely. And I should start out by saying, the name social prescribing, people think like, okay, socialization, friendship, that's where it gets its name. It actually gets its name from addressing our social determinants of health, meaning that access to food, access to transportation, access to safe and stable housing, a job, all of this impacts our health. And so social prescriptions aim to address those too. In other words, you're right, it wouldn't have made much sense for a doctor to prescribe Frank a cycling course if he also was having trouble putting food on the table or paying rent. So in more holistic and models of social prescribing, this happens too. They would prescribe food, resources, job, transportation, whatever it takes, in addition to that community activity. Now, in the United States, you're right. we don't have the same national healthcare incentives. But what we do have, even with our private insurers, is an incentive for them to spend less money on patients. And we know this, for example, maybe you or I or our loved ones have insurance plans that cover a gym prescription, for instance. And the reason why health insurance companies started to do this is because physical activity can help us prevent, lifestyle diseases, heart disease, hypertension, stroke, all conditions that can become expensive for an insurer down the line. And this, sounds a little insensitive talking about people's health this way. But at the end of the day, in the United States, you're right. We have private insurance. This is an incentive for them to spend less money. What's exciting is that there's a pilot in New Jersey right now between Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, a New Jersey private insurer, and New Jersey PAC, a thriving arts center in Newark, in which doctors are actually prescribing things through New Jersey PAC, whether it's a glass-making workshop, an art workshop, and having it covered by insurance for that same reason, for their hypothesis that maybe someone going to an art class, a glassmaking workshop, a concert might lead them to meet social connections, get out of their house, have something to look forward to, which could then save the insurance company's money down the line.
Let's talk about the fact that when we talk about social prescribing, let's put it in a bigger context, because basically, and go back to history, can you give our audience a sense of how we as humans, what we know about human evolution and the science of human evolution can help inform reconfiguring our healthcare system first and foremost, but society at large, so that we are all healthy, so that we're not addressing our health problems at the end point, but looking for that upstream solution.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, it's hard to even imagine what evolutionary times must have looked like, but we do know a couple of things based on more modern studies. So Surgeon General Vivek Murthy has done an incredible job of putting out data that shows the health harms of loneliness are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And if you think about it, that makes total sense why that would be true in our bodies, which evolved to survive in groups. We weren't meant to hunt or gather, get our food, build our shelter, survive on our own. And so his hypothesis, along with the late Dr. John Cacioppo, is that loneliness is almost like a signal, like hunger, a signal for our bodies to reconnect to other people. We know similarly, this is true about deprivation to nature, right? We evolved to be able to pay attention to nature. And other researchers have shown that spending just even up to 20 minutes in nature can have restorative and calming and attention-giving effects on par with prescription drugs like Ritalin. We know this to be true about movement as well. We evolved to move our bodies to chase our prey, to climb trees, and doing that as well is necessary for our survival. And even you think about the earliest societies, their cave paintings, that too is a sign that we evolved to be able to tell stories with one another. So art is even essential for our survival too. There's a great new book, Your Brain on Art, which shows down to a neurochemical level how art can be so health-giving for us. There's so much more science, it's hard to even get into it. But the bottom line is that, and we know this probably to be true in our personal lives, that we feel really good when we get out and connect with others or have a meaningful experience or experience joy, that this actually translates to both physical and mental health benefits.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Julie, for joining us today. Good luck to you with your book. Are there any websites that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. For folks looking to learn more about social prescribing, you can go to www.socialprescribing.co. And there you can also order my new book, The Connection Cure, The Prescriptive Power of Movement, Nature, Art, Service, and Belonging.
And we'll post a link to that from our website as well. Thank you so much, Julie. Again, good luck to you.
Thank you so much, Sonali.
My guest has been Julie Hartz, journalist and author of The Connection Cure, a book exploring the science, the stories, and the spread of what's called social prescribing. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, senior editor at Yes Media and host of Yes Presents, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find this program at yesmagazine.org, watch it on Free Speech TV, and listen to it on community and independent radio stations nationwide. Our audio podcast is on iTunes and Spotify.
This is WMNF Tampa. It's been Tuesday Cafe. We played Rising Up with Sonali. You can hear it at 11 Saturday evenings on our WMNF HD3 channel, The Source. It's an all news and public affairs channel that you can listen at WMNF.org or on the WMNF app. Again, this is WMNF Tampa, St. Petersburg. Stay tuned for Wavemaker.